إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا من سيئات أعمالنا من يهد الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن سيدنا وحبيبنا ومولانا محمدا عبده ورسوله. قال الله تعالى في كتابه الكريم بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. صدق الله العظيم. فقال النبي الكريم صلى الله تعالى عليه وسلم لا تقوم الساعة حتى يتقارب الزمان فتكون السنة كالشهر والشهر كالجمعة وتكون الجمعة كاليوم ويكون اليوم كالساعة وتكون الساعة كالضرمة بالنار أو كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام. أما بعد. Alhamdulillah, I was recently able to complete the Umrah. And moments like that are often a critical time. They're a moment that stands out in your life. And when you're able to perform such actions, when you have times that are memorable in your life, there's something that you can always reflect back on. And what we know as well is that the times in Jannah, there will be times, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, where we reflect with our loved ones on times in this dunya. The best moments that we shared with family, with friends, with our loved ones. And if you take a second and think about the best moments of your own life, you take a second and think about and reflect, what was the best moment of my own life? For some who are older, perhaps it was the birth of their children or their grandchildren, a newlywed. They might say, of course, that it was their wedding, someone who's just graduated, their graduation. But all of these memories, they underscore a reality that we don't often think about, which is that the best moment of your life has already happened. It's not to say the best moment that will happen. That still could be. But the best moment that you have ever experienced, and chances are it's not this khutbah, but the best moment of your life has already happened. And when you think about this simple fact, it underscores the reality of time. That we live in a universe that is seemingly run by time. For those who do not accept Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they look at every single force that exists, every single type of matter, every single thing else to invoke the rules of this universe through. And time is amongst them. And of course the surah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala references time that we all know is also ironically the shortest. It takes the least amount of time to recite. وَالْعَصْرِ, Allah says, by time. إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ. Mankind is in loss. Human beings are lost. Except إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ, except those who believe, do good, and there's another aspect that he adds to it. وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. They advise one another, they mutually advise each other towards the truth, towards righteousness, and also towards sabr, to have true patience. So what are some things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes clear through these verses? Number one is that by swearing by time, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts it into a broad category of things of His creation that He swears an oath by. And what that does is it takes this force that we don't understand. It takes this reality that we cannot escape, time, something that seems to be something that we are unable to move away from ever, that is undefeated in every reality seemingly, and it makes it small in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because just like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala swears by a star, just like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that He could swear by a fly, and even that which is smaller than that, At the end of the day, no creation is close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And you know, the root of the word asr, it has this meaning of constrictedness, of tightness. Today, coming to Jumu'ah, it felt tight. I felt like I was running behind, and I was rushing and rushing and rushing. And this is the situation for many of us in various things. And time seems like our master so often, right? That we work, we toil, we do so much. We spend so much energy on so many things, but there's never enough time. You never seem to have enough time to complete the things you need to take care and pay for all the things you have to help all the people that you want to do all the things that you desire. There's never enough time. And time is something that catches up to every person. Every athlete, every politician, every person, time catches up to them. Because there is no forever for us. The only one who has forever is As-Samad. As-Samad, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That He is the eternal. There is no ending. There's no beginning. Time falls short of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And all of these things that Allah takes an oath by are just as small in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as time is. Number two, He mentions this simple fact that we as creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, another creation, are lost. We are lost on our own. If we were left to our own devices, we would not be able to find our way. And then He gives an exception to this. That except those who believe, simple. Belief, however, is not the only part of it, who also act on that belief by doing good deeds. Because remember, no matter how much you believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, no matter how much you think, I believe in Him though, even though I don't pray, I believe in Him even though I don't pay zakat, I believe in Him even though Iblis believes in Allah more than you do. Because Iblis has been in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the difference is the amil salihat, those good deeds, because that is proving that you believe. You say the words and then you do them. But then there's a third part that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala adds on to this. That the only way you do not continue to be in loss after believing and continuing to act on that belief by doing good deeds is being amongst righteous people. Being amongst other people who can advise you in difficult times. Who can advise you in your worst moments and advise you in your best moments. That in your best moments, when you are in a position that you have some authority, you're in a position that you have some power, some financial benefit. When you're in such a situation, then what can you do? You can be advised to do the right thing. And that when you're in difficulty, when you're in circumstances that put you in a situation where you feel like the world is closing in on you, where you feel like you don't know what you're supposed to do next, when you're in that situation, they advise you towards patience, towards sabr, having that reliance on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then there's a hidden meaning within that. That if you continue to do these things, if you are one who believes, who does good deeds and remains around people who are good influences, you will not be in loss. The hidden meaning, however, is if you don't do any of these parts, you will continue to be in loss. You will continue to be in a state of loss. You will not know what to do next. You will not be able to move forward. If you really reflect and think about this, we know through the reality of this world that human beings are social creatures. To be alone is not the way that we operate. We are not creatures that are meant to be isolated. We are creatures that are meant to be together. And when we allow ourselves to become isolated, we allow ourselves to fall into situations where we are only by ourselves, we fall towards the worst of our instincts. And there's no one to guide us, no one to correct us. Amongst the most famous examples of this is in the Quran. The story that you all, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, all of us today will read about, which is in Surah Al-Kahf. The man of the two gardens, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, وَاضْرِبْ لَهُمْ مَثَلَ الرَّجُلَيْنِ جَعَلْنَا لِأَحَدِهِمَا جَنَّتَيْنِ مِنْ أَعْنَابٍ وَحَفَفْنَاهُمَا بِنَخْلٍ وَجَعَلْنَا بَيْنَهُمَا زَرْعًا. Allah tells us about these two men, one of whom received the bounty of these gardens. This blessing of this garden that had, these two gardens that had all kinds of fruits, that were surrounded by beautiful palm trees, that had a river running through it. And they had every possible thing that he could ever want. But the problem was that this man was given so much that he lost himself in the excess. He allowed himself to become lost in the things of this dunya that he was given. The materialism affected him to such an extent that he lost himself in it. And when he emerges from that situation where he has isolated himself, he has not been in a situation where people had been advising him towards good. He had some level of belief, at the very least. This is what we get an indication towards, that he had some level of belief, but then he received so much of the dunya that he got lost in. And when he got lost in it, he comes to meet a friend of his, he comes to meet this other individual, and the first sentence that he can think to himself to say to this man is that, أَنَا أَكْثَرُ مِنْكَ مَالًا وَأَعَزُّ نَفَرًا. Hey buddy, it's nice to see you. How's your day? I just want you to know that I have more money than you. And I also have a bigger family than you. I have more than you do. You hear this and you think, what kind of person talks like this? Who is it that could possibly say something so callous, so crude, so crass? And you start to realize as Allah goes on about this man, وَدَخَلَ جَنَّتُهُ وَهُوَ ظَالِمٌ لِنَفْسِهِ. He enters his garden and he's oppressing his own self because he's looking at what he has around him and he's thinking, man, this is the life. I've done so well. I've done such a good job at this. I've done so much for myself. And there's a little part of him that seems to kind of want to pull back. There's a little side to him that seems to be advising him, don't do this, don't do this. But he overcomes it in a bad way. The part of him that's trying to say, no, don't think this. He says, وَمَا أَظُنُّ أَن تَبِيدَ هَذِهِ أَبَدًا. I don't think this will ever end. And then he says that, وَلَئِن رُدِّدْتُ إِلَىٰ رَبِّي لَأَجِدَنَّ خَيْرًا مِنْهَا مُنْقَلَبًا. And even if it does end, it's okay because Allah will give me even more than this. So what has he done in that situation? What has he done in that moment? Having isolated himself, having put himself in a situation where even the one person who was willing to be close to him, or at least the one person that was willing to converse with him, this person is now repelled by him. Because he's come out to him and said, hey, I have more money than you, more kids, I have more things than you. And then he goes back into his heedlessness. And he allows himself to believe his own lies. And when he does come back to himself, when he does come back, to his friend asks him a simple question. What are you doing? How can you disbelieve in Allah? How are you doing things this way? What is wrong with you in this world that you've built for yourself? And he tells him and reminds him that, look, it's only a matter of time before what you have ends. عَسَى رَبِّي أَن يُؤْتِيَنِي خَيْرًا مِنْ جَنَّتِكَ أَوْ يُرْسِلَ عَلَيْهَا حُسْبَانًا مِنَ السَّمَاءِ. He said, look, Allah might give me even better than what you have. And He might destroy the thing that you have. Time is the thing that's going to distinguish between us. So you shouldn't waste your time. You shouldn't allow yourself to fall into this heedlessness on your own that, oh, I'm so amazing for what I've done. Oh man, these things that I have are so wonderful. He's making a simple point to him. And what's the result? What's the situation that befalls this man that after he feels himself, he feels like he's so wonderful, He's allowed himself to become isolated and as a result lost in the things of this dunya that he's acquired, is that eventually he ends up alone again. But this time Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, وَأُحِيطَ بِثَمَرِهِ فَأَصْبَحَ يُقَلِّبُ كَفَّيْهِ عَلَى مَا أَنْفَقَ فِيهَا. He's watching as his entire fortune falls apart. He's watching as this garden that he had just slowly disintegrates in front of his eyes. And what can he do except Allah says he just wrings his hands. The description is that he's putting his fingers between each other and he's wringing his hands and he's trying to think about what is it that I've done? Why did I do this? Why did I allow myself to make myself a partner with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And that doesn't seem to be the obvious connection. But he says, لَوْلَا أُشْرِكَ بِرَبِّي أَحَدًا. I wish I had never associated partners with Allah. What partner did he associate with Allah? He didn't say, oh, it's because of this God or that God. No. The partner that he associated with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was himself. He was that partner in that moment. In his mind's eye, he allowed himself to become that which had built everything that he had. And he allowed himself to think that Allah would just give him whatever he wanted. But this is not how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala operates. And what we see clearly is that this man remained in a state of loss. Why? Because while he may have believed at a certain point, and in fact he may well have done good deeds at a certain point, he isolated himself into this dunya, this life, these material things that he had built for himself. And in doing so, he only led himself off of the right path. He only walked himself right off of the way that he was supposed to go. You and I are not unlike this man. It may well be that we aren't talking to people in a manner that sounds as crass and crude as, I have more money than you and I have more kids. That part may not be true. But recognize that this man was so focused on acquiring, on building, on growing for his dunya, that he isolated himself and thought that his simple belief would be enough. And the reality was that it was not. This man thought to himself that, you know what, I have a lot in this life, and you can replace, if you're trying to understand what the parable or the metaphor or the example of two gardens is, replace two gardens with two cars. Replace it with your home. Replace it with a nice bank account. At least money that you have to save, put aside for things in the future that you may want to do. All of this is just like the idea of two gardens. And when we allow ourselves to make that the primary focus, when we make that the thing that we are working towards in this dunya, we are isolating ourselves and we are setting ourselves up to walk off that path. Because belief is not enough. And even good deeds with belief are not enough. وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. To advise mutually, to be around people who advise you towards good in your best days, to righteousness in your best days, and to patience in your worst. This is what time puts us in. This is the situation where if we allow ourselves to simply allow time to flow by us, think that the things of this dunya that we've made the central part of our lives, if we allow those things to be what we focus on, time will fly right by us. And we'll find ourselves like that man on the day of judgment, wringing our hands, asking what was the point of any of it. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect us from such a fate. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to come closer to Him. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect us from this dunya being the biggest part of our hearts. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم لسائر المسلمين فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين سيدنا ونبينا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم أما بعد. So then, what is it that we have to do in order to protect ourselves from that fate? To protect ourselves from being like the man of the garden. Someone who allowed this dunya to become akbar hammi, the main focus of his life, who isolated himself as a result. And the first response is to be in good company. And I have to emphasize clearly, when I say good company, I don't mean all company. To be in good company. There may well be people that you spend your time with, who, when you're with them, time flies right by. But ask yourself a simple question. At the end of any gathering, with those individuals, do you find that a part of yourself has improved? It doesn't need to be significant. It doesn't need to be wholesale changes. But at the very least, if you took no benefit towards your Creator, if you took nothing away from it that allowed you to focus a little bit more on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you need to ask yourself, was that really good company? So often we have dawats and parties and hangouts and all these things. But the conversation is what? Politics? Most of the time in another country? What value is that towards your akhirah? What benefit will that bring? I'm not saying you can't have these conversations. But why is it that that's this main theme every time? Why is that the focus every time? And mind you, the best part of it is that at the end of these gatherings, nothing has changed in that other country. Everybody gave their opinion, everybody gave their thoughts, and nothing changed in that other country. So what was the point of it? What was the value? What was the benefit? Reflect on the idea of good company. The one place where you will always find good company is in the house of Allah. Because in the house of Allah, no matter what, you will find people who are sacrificing for the sake of Allah. They could be somewhere else, but they make it a point to come here. And the hidden lesson, like I mentioned in Surah Al-Asr, is that if you don't act on all parts of it, if you just believe or you just do good deeds, but you don't also spend your time with righteous individuals who can guide you, who can help you, then you still remain in a level of loss. The masjid, that's the place. This is where you can find yourself in good company. We always have different programs, things going on. Even if not, be here for salah. And you'll find an opportunity to spend time with people in the best possible environment. To learn lessons. Be in good company. Number two, do not simply be a passenger in the journey of time. So often, we wake up every single day, we just go through our routine, we go back to sleep, rinse, repeat. That's what it becomes. Wake up, go to sleep. Wake up, go to sleep. Wake up, go to sleep. There are people right now who are losing their minds over such a cycle, but they don't know about Islam. And for us, we cannot allow ourselves to be passengers in this journey of time. We have to be drivers of what we have been given the blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to do. You have been given free will. You have been given the ability to make choices. So act on that. You can choose to coast. You can choose to simply go along with whatever as it was just because. Or you can be present. You can be engaged. You can be involved. And that goes for every aspect of your life. Whether that's in your home, whether that's in your masjid, whether that's in your community, outside of the masjid, your neighborhood. You can choose to coast or you can choose to be involved. And when you choose to be involved, you are a driver. You are someone who is actively utilizing the gift and the choice of free will. And lastly, make sure that no matter how much you get distracted by your life, you find time for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it's easy to say, right? We always have these simple ideas, faith, family, this, that. But words are meaningless, to be quite honest. Words have value when there is action behind them. And if we don't allow ourselves to be people of action, and we are simply people who say, inshallah, without having any desire to actually complete the thing that we're hoping for or making a dua for in that moment, then we are not people of action. The blessing now that we have is we are less than a month away from the month of Ramadan. A time where Allah gives us every single year to reset, to be able to do some spring cleaning of sorts. But Ramadan does not simply begin with the first fast. You cannot walk into the month having just thought to yourself, Ramadan's coming, okay, I'll get better when Ramadan comes. Ramadan needs to be prepared for. Whether that's doing extra good deeds, reading a little bit of Quran every single day, reading some tahajjud in the mornings before Fajr time, which comes in much later than it does at other points in the year. Whether it's even doing things for other people or fasting in preparation for the month, we have to prepare for the month. Prepare ourselves for those habits now. Because that is what is going to allow us to have a successful Ramadan. Like anything. If you walk into a job and you learn nothing about it until you walk into it and you have to start figuring it out on the fly, you will never be as successful as the person who spent time preparing for that job or that class. So prepare for the time that is coming ahead of us so that you can be the driver of your own fate. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive us for all of our shortcomings. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us people who are active in our lives. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to open our hearts to His guidance. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad kama sallaita ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim innaka Hamidum Majid. Allahumma barik ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad kama barakta ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim innaka Hamidum Majid. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. ربنا ظلمنا أنفسنا وإن لم تغفر لنا وترحمنا لنكونن من الخاسرين. ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا يا مولانا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم. عباد الله إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون. اذكروا الله العظيم يذكركم واشكروه يزدكم واستغفروا يغفر لكم واتقوا يجعل لكم من أمركم مخرجا. أقيموا الصلاة.
الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله.